She was only 16, beaten, starved, forced to sleep on the kitchen floor like trash, not knowing the woman who maltreated her was her own mother. It was still dark when Esther quietly rolled off the thin mat on the cold kitchen floor. Her back ached, her feet were sore, and her arms were heavy from yesterday's cleaning. But she had no choice. Madame Grace didn't allow her to sleep in the boys' quarters like other workers. She said Esther was too dirty to share space with adults. So, she made her sleep on the kitchen floor beside the gas cylinder and old mop bucket. Esther didn't complain. She just picked up the broken broom and started sweeping. Her fingers were already bruised, and one of her fingernails was cracked from scrubbing the bathroom tiles the day before. She had no slippers, no new clothes, just 2 oversized uniforms Madame Grace had thrown at her the day she arrived. "You should be grateful," the woman had said. "Some maids beg to enter this house. I picked you out of pity." Pity, that word, haunted Esther. If this was pity, what would hatred feel like? By 5:30 a.m., she had swept the entire downstairs, mopped the tiles, boiled water, and arranged the breakfast table without eating anything herself. The last food she had eaten was 1 slice of dry bread around 2 p.m. the previous day, which she had found in the trash. She had to eat it quickly before the cook returned. If they caught her, they would beat her. Not just shout, beat her. That's how it worked in Madame Grace's house. You could mop a floor 3 times and still be slapped if a dry leaf blew in through the window. You could iron 20 clothes and still be insulted if one sleeve had a tiny wrinkle. And Esther was the new maid. She had no one. She was just 16. The bell rang sharply at 6:00 a.m. It was Madame Grace's way of saying, "Come now or suffer." Esther dropped the mop and ran upstairs to her madame's room. She didn't knock, there was no time. She entered quickly and bowed her head. Madame Grace sat at her dressing table in her white silk robe, rubbing cream on her face. "You didn't iron my beige skirt," she said without looking. "I did, Ma. It's in your wardrobe." "Don't argue with me," she snapped. She picked up the nearest object, a silver hairbrush, and threw it across the room. It hit Esther on the shoulder. "Do you think I'm stupid?" Madame Grace shouted. "If I say it's not ironed, then it's not ironed." Esther held her shoulder, her lips pressed together. She didn't cry. She had learned not to cry. Crying made them angrier. After dressing her madam, arranging her shoes, and polishing her bag handles, Esther returned downstairs to continue washing the dishes from last night's dinner. Her stomach grumbled again. The cook paused and eyed her. "No food for you today?" she hissed. "You broke a glass yesterday." Esther didn't argue. She simply picked up the plate sponge and continued scrubbing with cold water and weak soap. She remembered how, just yesterday, Madame Grace had poured hot tea on her leg because she served it without lemon. It was still healing. She wasn't even allowed to bandage it. By 10:00 a.m., Esther was on her knees, scrubbing the living room floor with a rag. Not a mop, a rag. Madame Grace said mops were for hotels, not real training. "You girls think being a maid is about looking pretty," she had said. "Not in my house. I'll scrub the stupidity out of you." So Esther scrubbed and scrubbed and scrubbed, even as her knees peeled, even as her back cried for rest. Even as Madame Grace sat on the couch scrolling through Instagram, sipping orange juice, watching Esther sweat like a pig. Not once did she say thank you. At noon, the visitors started arriving. Madame Grace's friends from church, rich elegant women in lace and gold jewelry. Esther was sent to serve them drinks and chin-chin. She moved carefully, balancing the tray like her life depended on it. Because it did. She knew what would happen if she spilled anything. As she bent to serve one of the women, she felt her ankle twist slightly. Her body tilted. The tray tilted. One glass cup wobbled. Clink! It fell, shattered. The room went silent. Esther froze. Her heart stopped. She turned to Madame Grace. The woman stood up slowly, smiling too calmly. "Oh no," she said. "Esther, what have you done?" "I'm sorry, Ma." Slap. The woman's hand cracked across her face. Slap. The second one sent her to the floor. "Get out, you stupid, useless thing. My guests are here and you're disgracing me? Get out before I call the police." Esther crawled backward, holding her cheek, her eyes stung with hot tears. She ran into the back kitchen and locked the door. She slid to the floor, buried her face in her arms, and cried for the first time in weeks. She cried hard, like a child, like someone who didn't know who she was anymore. When the visitors left, Madame Grace knocked on the kitchen door, but not gently. Bang! "You think you can cry and make me feel bad? You're not the first girl to work here, and you won't be the last. You better fix your face and come back out, or go back to the gutter you came from." Esther didn't answer. She just held her stomach as it growled again from hunger. She looked around the kitchen. Nothing to eat, not even crumbs. She opened the small drawer under the sink where she hid her most precious item, her old necklace, the one she had since childhood. It was dirty now, rusting, but it was the only thing that gave her comfort. She wore it again and held it to her chest. She didn't know why, but in that moment, she whispered one quiet prayer. "God, if you're watching, please don't let me die here." Then she lay on the cold floor and closed her eyes. Not to sleep, but to forget, even just for a little while. It rained heavily that night. The type of rain that shook windows and flooded gutters. Thunder clapped like angry spirits. But inside Madame Grace's mansion, nobody seemed to care. Esther lay on the kitchen floor again, her body wrapped in a damp towel. Water was dripping from the sink above her drop by drop onto her head. But she didn't move. She had grown used to discomfort. Her body still ached from the slaps earlier that day. Her cheek was swollen. Her ankle throbbed. Her eyes were red, but not from crying. She had run out of tears. Even the pain had started to feel normal. At 16, Esther felt like a woman with no skin. Everything hurt. But worse than the physical pain was the silence. Nobody came to check on her. Nobody knocked to ask if she was okay. She was invisible. In this house, no one cared if you cried. The next morning, she woke up to Madame Grace's shouting voice again. "Where is that animal?" "She didn't wake me up for church." Esther jumped to her feet, limping as she grabbed the mop and bucket. She rushed upstairs before Madame Grace's rage exploded. When she reached the master bedroom, she found the woman standing in a white towel, her wig removed, her face half made. She looked angry enough to break something. "You're becoming very stupid," Madame Grace said, pointing at her. "Is this how you serve God? You want the devil to win this house, Abi?" "No, Ma," Esther mumbled. "Did you clean my bathroom?" "Yes, Ma." Madame Grace walked in to inspect. She screamed, "You call this cleaning? Look at this soap mark. You were cursed." Slap. The towel fell from her hand. She picked up her perfume bottle and threw it. It missed Esther by inches and shattered against the bathroom tiles. Esther stood still, shaking. "I should send you away," Madame Grace said, breathing heavily. But I won't. You'll stay, and you will suffer. That Sunday was a long one. While Madame Grace and her daughter Vanessa went to church in their shiny SUV, Esther stayed behind to clean the house from top to bottom. She scrubbed all 5 toilets. She washed the curtains. She rearranged the kitchen cabinet. She polished every tile in the hallway. And she did it all without breakfast, without slippers, with wounds on her leg and bandage wrapped in nylon, because there was no proper first aid box for her. By 6 p.m., the rain came again. This time, Madame Grace returned with visitors from church, 3 women and a pastor. Everyone looked holy and happy. Esther was called to serve them drinks again. She came out quietly in her torn uniform, her eyes swollen and her feet shaking. As she poured juice into glasses, she noticed the pastor's eyes on her. He said nothing, but when Esther bent to serve him, he looked up and said gently, "Are you okay?" Esther's hand froze. She nodded quickly, eyes still on the tray. Madame Grace laughed sharply. "She's fine, Pastor. Don't mind her face. She's just shy and clumsy. She fell down yesterday." The women chuckled. Esther said nothing. She stood there holding the tray, pretending not to feel the eyes watching her bruise. Later that night, as she returned to the kitchen, the cook whispered something while washing rice. "Better be careful, girl," the woman said, without turning. "Many have entered this house and left in silence. You too can disappear." Esther blinked. "What did I do?" she asked. "You exist," the cook muttered. "That's already a problem." Esther felt her chest tighten. Even among the workers, she had no friends. They saw her as weak, as a threat, as someone to avoid. She didn't understand why, but every day she felt like this house didn't just want her to suffer, it wanted her to vanish. That night, while cleaning the library, she found a dusty book on parenting sitting oddly on the top shelf. She wiped it with her cloth and opened the first page. There was handwriting on it. "To my baby girl, you may never read this, but I pray God lets you find me. One day, I made mistakes. I was young, but I loved you. Forgive me. M." Esther's hands froze. Her heart beat fast. She looked around. No one was there. She closed the book quickly and placed it back. She wasn't supposed to be reading. She wasn't even supposed to be seen in the library. Madame Grace's angry voice echoed down the hallway. "Don't call me about housemaids again. If I say I don't want any village girls, I mean it." She's slow, dirty, and stubborn. This one is no different. To slam. The sound of her phone hitting the dresser shook the silence. At midnight, while everyone slept, Esther sat in the back kitchen with a bucket of cold water and washed her uniform for the next day. Her fingers bled again. She didn't want Madame Grace to say she was smelling. She didn't want another slap. Or worse, another threat to be thrown out. As she scrubbed the fabric, her tears dropped into the bucket. She didn't make noise. She didn't sob. She just cried, quietly, like a girl who had learned the world was not her friend. Suddenly, she heard footsteps. She looked up. Vanessa, the madam's daughter, stood by the door. Vanessa was 17, pretty, confident, and mean. She hated Esther from day one. "Why are you washing clothes now?" she asked. I wanted to finish early, Ma." Vanessa looked at her and smirked. "You're too slow. No wonder Mummy doesn't like you." Esther didn't reply. "You know," Vanessa continued, "I told Mummy that you looked like one of those bush girls they steal from the village. Are you even normal?" Esther stared at the bucket. "Answer me," Vanessa snapped. Esther spoke softly. "I don't know where I'm from, Ma. Vanessa laughed. Figures, she turned and left. Esther looked at the wall, then at her hands, then at the faint shadow of herself in the bucket water. She didn't recognize the girl staring back. That night, as thunder rolled again and rain poured heavily for the third day in a row, Esther lay on the cold kitchen floor and whispered the same prayer. God, even if you won't take me away from here, please show me why I'm suffering like this. Her eyes closed, her fingers clutched the old necklace on her chest, unaware that the answer to her pain was sleeping just 2 rooms away. The next morning came like punishment. Esther stood in front of Madame Grace's room by 5:30 a.m. She was afraid to knock too loud and too afraid not to knock at all. She tapped the door. No answer. She tapped again. Still no answer. Just as she turned to leave, bang! The door flung open. Madame Grace stood there with one eye still half shut, her wig off, and her anger already away. You want to knock my door down, right? I'm sorry, Ma. Did I ask you to wake me? No, Ma. So what are you doing here? Do you think I don't have an alarm clock? Esther bent her head. I just wanted to remind you about your meeting by 7. Slap! The sound ran in her ear before she felt the pain. You're too forward, Madame Grace snapped. Too sharp for your age. You think you're special? I'll show you what it means to be a maid in my house. That morning, Madame Grace refused to allow her eat anything. No breakfast for you today, she said, sipping papaya juice in front of her. Maybe hunger will teach you humility. Later that afternoon, Madame Grace's friend came over, Mrs. Adedayo, a rich woman with loud earrings and louder gossip. As she walked into the living room, she saw Esther wiping the floor. "Ah, Grace, you still use these local girls?" she said, shaking her head. "I don't trust them. They steal. They lie. You better be careful." Esther kept wiping. She said nothing. Madame Grace smiled and replied, "This one? She doesn't even have sense to steal. I think poverty swallowed her brain. But I'll train her well. By the time I'm done, she won't dare look me in the eye." They both laughed. Esther remained on her knees. Her knees hurt, but her heart hurt more. That evening, Esther went to pour hot water for Madame Grace's bath. As she entered the bathroom, her weak hand slipped and the metal kettle fell, spilling some water on the tiled floor. She gasped and grabbed a rag to clean it immediately. Too late. Madame Grace entered. Her foot slipped slightly. She didn't fall, but she screamed anyway. "You want to kill me?" she shouted. "Is that your plan? You, this witch from the village. That's why I don't take house girls from those useless orphanages." Esther dropped the rag. "I'm sorry, Ma. It was a mistake." Slap again, then another, then a blow to her back that sent her falling against the sink. Esther cried out, not from pain, but from the shock. Madame Grace grabbed her by the collar. "If you ever make me slip again, I will beat you till your spirit leaves your body." "You think I'm joking?" She flung Esther against the bathroom door. The girl hit the floor and didn't move for a moment. That night, Esther sat outside beside the kitchen window, her head down, blood drying on her elbow. The compound was quiet again. She looked up at the stars and whispered, "God, please. I don't want to be rich. I just want to be safe. I want someone to love me. Just once." She reached into her pocket and touched her necklace again. She opened the locket. The same old faded photo stared back at her. The woman inside had kind eyes, soft cheeks. She didn't know who she was, but every night, Esther begged her in her heart, "If you're my mother, Please come back for me." Esther was only 3 days old when she was wrapped in a thin wrapper and left at the gate of St. Mary's orphanage home in the middle of the night. It was raining that night too. A small bundle lying in the mud, soaked and crying. She had no name, no birth certificate. No one knew how she got there. No story, just a necklace with locket around her tiny neck. The nurses took her in and gave her the name Esther because she had survived the night. She must be a strong child, the matron said. But nobody asked where she came from. Nobody asked why someone would abandon a baby like that without even a note. Nobody. Except the baby herself. Esther grew up behind the tall rusted gates of that orphanage. There was one woman at the orphanage named Sister Nduka. She was the one who handled outside connections. She would find rich families who needed house girls and match them with girls from the orphanage for a price. She would tell the girls things like, "You'll be treated like family. They will train you in school. They will feed you 3 times a day." But when the girls came back bruised or broken, she always blamed them. Maybe you were lazy. Maybe you were rude. Who told you life was fair? She made money from their pain. One hot Thursday morning, Sister Nuka received a phone call from someone in Lekki. A woman, rich voice, sharp tongue, looking for a new maid, one who was young, quiet, and desperate. "I don't want any girl that thinks she's clever," the voice said. "I want someone I can train from scratch. Do you understand me?" Sister Nduka smiled and said she had the perfect girl. That same day, she called Esther into the office. "You," she said, chewing groundnuts. "You're lucky today. A rich woman wants a house girl. I told her you were very obedient." Esther stood there, nervous. "How old are you again?" the woman asked. 16, Ma. "Good. Don't say too much when you get there. Don't act smart. And for God's sake, hide that locket. Some of these women fear village charms." Esther nodded. She didn't even ask who the woman was. She didn't ask where she was going. She just packed her 2 dresses, her toothbrush, and the only thing she had from her past, the old necklace. She hugged her pillow, waved goodbye to no one, and followed the driver that came to pick her up. The mansion looked like a hotel when she arrived. Shiny floors, big gates, flower pots, swimming pool. Esther stood at the front door like a small leaf in the wind. When Madame Grace opened the door and saw her, she didn't smile. She scanned her from head to toe like she was inspecting firewood. "You're smaller than I expected," she said. Esther bowed. "Good afternoon, Ma." Madame Grace turned and walked inside. "Drop your bag over there. I don't allow noise in this house. I don't like smart girls. You do what I say and you'll stay. You mess up and you go." "Yes, Ma," Esther said. She never even looked at her face properly. Madame Grace pointed. "That's the kitchen. You'll sleep there." Esther blinked. "Inside the kitchen, Ma?" The woman's eyes turned sharp. "Do you have a room somewhere else?" Esther bent her head quickly. "No, Ma." "Good. Now, listen well. You are here to serve. This is not a charity home. You don't touch food unless you're told. You don't enter any room unless I send you. And you don't speak unless I speak to you." "Yes, Ma. I don't like noise. I don't like excuses. If you make me angry, I'll send you back to wherever they picked you from. Do you understand?" "Yes, Ma." She turned and began walking away. That night, as the house slept, Esther sat outside again, looking at the moon. She held her necklace in her hand and whispered softly, "I don't know who you are or where you are, but if you're still alive, why did you leave me? She didn't expect an answer, but somewhere deep in the house, Madame Grace rolled over in her sleep, restless, sweating. And for the first time in years, she dreamed of a crying baby in the rain. The Harmattan breeze came early that morning. Esther stood outside barefoot, sweeping the front yard, while her hands shook from cold. Her nose was blocked, her throat was dry, her lips were cracked, but Madame Grace didn't care. "You didn't finish sweeping by 5. 0 am," she snapped, opening the front door in her silk robe. "I'm almost done, Ma," Esther said, rubbing her arms for warmth. "You talk too much. Since I brought you here, has anything improved in your brain? Or should I send you back to your suffering orphanage?" Esther kept sweeping. She didn't reply, even if she wanted to speak. Her voice was tired. She hadn't slept well in days. Her body ached. Her feet had wounds. Her uniform was wet from early morning dew. Back inside the house, Madame Grace's daughter Vanessa was preparing for school. Esther entered the room to help pack her bag. Vanessa looked at her with disgust. "Why are your hands dirty? Don't touch my things with your peasant hands." "Sorry, Ma," Esther whispered. She picked up the school books and carefully wiped them one by one. Then Vanessa did something cruel. She opened her water bottle and poured it on Esther's only slippers. "There," she said. "That matches the rest of you." Esther looked down at her feet. The slippers were old, torn, and now wet. She said nothing, just picked them up and walked out quietly. By afternoon, Madame Grace hosted 3 visitors. Esther was told to cook and serve lunch: jollof rice, fried plantain, and fish. She cooked it perfectly. She tasted nothing, just cooked, arranged the tray, and served with shaking hands. But when one of the guests saw a small pepper seed floating in her water cup, she made a face. "This girl wants to poison me," the woman said. Madame Grace stood up. "Esther, come here." She came quickly. "Yes, Ma." Slap. The tray nearly fell from her hand. Madame Grace dragged her by the arm and pushed her to the wall. "Do you want to kill my guests? Are you mad? You can't even wash a cup?" "I didn't do anything, Ma. I swear." Slap again. This time, her lips started bleeding. The guests said nothing. Nobody stopped her. In that house, the maid's pain was entertainment. Later that night, Esther went to the bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror. She didn't recognize the face anymore. Her eyes looked darker. Her lips were swollen. Her hair was uncombed and broken at the edges. She removed her uniform and poured cold water on her body. The water hit her bruises. She stared at herself again and then whispered, "Am I still human?" Later that week, Madame Grace's friend visited again. They sat by the pool, drinking wine and laughing. Esther was sent to bring snacks. As she served the tray, one of the women said, "This one looks like someone with deep spiritual problems. You better watch her." Madame Grace nodded. "I've been thinking the same. Sometimes she stares like she's seeing things. You know these orphanage girls. You don't know who their parents are." Esther stood there with the tray in her hand. She couldn't believe what she was hearing, but her face remained straight. She placed the snacks on the table and walked away slowly. Then, quietly, as she passed the corner, she stopped and wiped one tear from her cheek. Just one. That night, Esther sat alone again. Outside by the back tap, she opened her wrapper and pulled out a small note she had hidden for years, given to her long ago by a kind nurse at the orphanage. The note only had 5 words. "Never forget that you matter." She stared at it. Then looked at the sky. "I don't feel like I matter," she whispered. "I don't even feel like I exist." Her voice cracked. She clutched the note to her chest and began to cry, but not loudly, because in Madame Grace's house, even crying was not allowed. Esther was in the backyard hanging wet clothes when she heard the knock, 3 soft knocks. Then silence. She paused. It wasn't the front gate. It was the back entrance, the small door no one used except the old driver. She looked through the curtain and saw a short elderly woman holding a bag, leaning on a walking stick. Her wrapper was tied tight across her chest. She wore rubber sandals and carried a white Bible in her hand. Before Esther could move, the main door opened and Madame Grace rushed out. "Mama!" Grace shouted. "Why didn't you call me before coming?" The old woman smiled weakly. "I wanted to surprise you." "Surprise? What if I wasn't home?" "You're always home," the woman said, entering slowly. Esther bowed and greeted. "Good afternoon, Ma." The old woman looked at her. Her smile disappeared for a second. Something in her eyes changed. She stared too long, too deep. Then she looked away. "Afternoon, my dear," she said quietly. Madame Grace ignored her usual talk. She just said, "Come inside, Mama. I'll prepare your room," then turned sharply to Esther. "Clean that guest room now. Sweep, mop, wash the toilet, spray lavender oil on the curtains, and iron the bed sheets before 5:00. "Yes, Ma," Esther said, and rushed upstairs. While cleaning, Esther couldn't stop thinking about how Mama Ibele had looked at her. It wasn't an ordinary look. It felt like the old woman was searching for something on her face, something lost. Esther checked the mirror. Nothing was wrong, just the same tired eyes and cracked lip. But that look stayed with her. Later that evening, Esther served Mama Ibele a hot plate of yam porridge in the visitor's room. The woman watched her closely as she bent to place the tray on the stool. "Thank you, my dear," she said softly. "You're welcome, Ma. What's your name?" "Esther." "How old are you?" 16, Ma." "Where are your parents?" Esther hesitated. "I don't know, Ma. I grew up in an orphanage." The old woman blinked slowly. Her eyes watered a bit. She reached into her wrapper and brought out a handkerchief. "You grew up there all your life?" "Yes, Ma." "No visitor ever came for you?" "No, Ma." She nodded, then said the quietest thing Esther had ever heard. "Some children are thrown away, not because they are bad, but because the world is." Esther didn't understand it. She just bowed and left the room. That night, Mama Ibele sat with Madame Grace in the living room, drinking warm tea. The house was quiet. Grace scrolled through her phone. "Mama, I'm trying to expand my clothing business to Dubai," she said. "You should see how the orders are growing. I'm thinking of sacking that stupid girl soon. She's too dull." "You mean the maid?" her mother asked. "Yes. She moves like something is wrong with her legs." The old woman sipped her tea. "She looks like you." Grace laughed loudly. "God forbid. That girl looks nothing like me." "I didn't say her body. I said her face." "Which face?" "Mama, please, don't start." Mama Ibele looked up. "Has she ever reminded you of anything, of anyone?" Grace frowned. "What's all this now? Are you here to see me or inspect my house, girl?" "I'm just asking questions." "Well, stop it. I'm not in the mood for your village dreams today." The old woman stood up. "Sometimes God sends us signs. It is people who refuse to look." And she walked away slowly to her room. Grace hissed and picked up her phone again. The next morning, Esther was in the kitchen boiling rice when the old woman entered. "Can I sit here?" she asked. Esther quickly brought a stool. "Yes, Ma." She sat near the back door. where the breeze blew in quietly. She stared at Esther again. Then her eyes landed on the Esther locket necklace. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. "I had it since I was a baby." The orphanage said it came with me. Mama Ebele stood up quickly. She looked around, then walked away, slowly, as if carrying a heavy question in her chest. That night, she said nothing to Grace. She just sat on the balcony, looking at the sky. Grace came out, sipping wine. "Mama, you're very quiet. Hope you're not falling sick." "I'm thinking." "About what?" "About how a woman can be rich and still blind." Grace rolled her eyes. "Mama, I've had enough. If you came here to confuse me, I will book your return ticket myself." The old woman looked at her, then said, "Do you remember the baby you told me died many years ago?" Grace froze. Her grip tightened on the wine glass. "What kind of nonsense question is that?" she whispered. The old woman stood up and quietly walked back inside.